Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1965. We're going to be taking a look at Marty Robbins and he's going to be playing through El Paso. So let's get Marty up on screen and see how he gets on.
Out in the West Texas town of El Paso, I fell in love with a Mexican girl. Nighttime would find me in Rose's Cantina. Music would play and Felina would whirl. Blacker than night were the eyes of Felina, wicked and evil while casting a spell. My love was deep for this Mexican maiden. I was in love, but in vain I could tell. One night a wild young cowboy came in, wild as the West Texas wind. Dashing and daring, a drink he was sharing with wicked Felina, the girl that I loved. So in anger I challenged his right for the love of this maiden. Down went his hand for the gun that he wore. My challenge was answered in less than a heartbeat. The handsome young stranger lay dead on the floor. Just for a moment I stood there in silence, shocked for the foul evil deed I had done. Many thoughts raced through my mind as I stood there. I had but one chance and that was to run. Out through the back door of Roses I ran, out where the horses were tied. I caught a good one, it looked like it could run. Up on its back and away I did ride, just as fast as I could from the West Texas town of El Paso out to the Badlands of New Mexico.
I'm just going to jump in here because this is classic country in terms of the composition, the story within the composition. We've got those lyrics that are telling a story about death and heartache and then death again at the end when we get to the end of the song. But having that positive sound in the vocal as well over the top of that major progression, you won't really realize what is going on lyrically unless you really listen in, because it's so easy to listen to. And that's the thing about country music and a great composition. Melodically here, it is so strict, the way that Marty is following the same strict melody throughout the whole song, so that when you do listen into the story, when you do follow along, you can really understand the story and the message of the song. And again, that is such an important thing to do with country music in general. Mentioning the story of the track and the way that it's going to fly under the radar unless you really listen in, try and get the lyrics up on screen and type into Google, not Marty Robbins El Paso, but Grateful Dead El Paso lyrics, and you will find the lyrics for this particular version of the song, this performance. It just so happened that Grateful Dead did this live and did their own version, so of course they did it afterwards in the late 60s and 70s. Chord-wise, we have got a D minor in here and a C seventh as well, so we do go a little bit towards that minor key, but it is all based in the major key around C. So we've just got the C, the D minor, the G, there's an F in there, C seventh as well. So we've got some variations. The progression is just going to loop around. If you want to play along, just follow that order and you'll be able to work it out. And Marty is also using his thumb to strike the strings in terms of that strumming pattern. And you might find that when you don't have a pick, that using your thumb is a totally valid way of doing it. You can use the nail on your first finger if if you get used to using that as a technique, sometimes you can almost hide the plectrum when you're holding it, or pick, and you can strike the strings with your nail intentionally. In fact, sometimes you'll be able to get a pinched harmonic on electric guitar with lots of distortion with the nail of your finger before you can do it with the pick. It just seems to be one of those things that's slightly more easy to do because the flesh of your finger then catches the string straight afterwards. But getting into the right hand technique that Marty's showing here, it's going to give a slightly less offensive sound because striking down on the strings with the thumb means that the flesh of the thumb is hitting those strings on the way down. If you want to get a more aggressive sound to come up, you can use the nail, and that's something that artistically you can throw in there. If your nail is long enough, then you can use the nail on your thumb on the way down. Marty will start in the middle of a verse or a particular line lyrically, the way that it just revolves around, the story's ever changing, ever flowing, the way that Marty delivers it. And it's so interesting the whole way through. This song won a Grammy as well in 1959. It came from the album Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs. And if you play computer games, you might already know Marty Robbins' work without realizing it, because in 2010, there's a game called Fallout New Vegas, and it's a game that I played a hell of a lot. I completed it 3 times, and if you've played that game, you'll understand how many hours I must have put into it in order to do that. But the game was set in a post-apocalyptic scenario of desert and wasteland, all that kind of stuff. But on the old radios, Marty Robbins was playing, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, it was the song called Big Iron, and you'll recognize it as soon as you play it. That is Marty Robbins playing through the old transistor radios that you'd listen to around the game, and it'll be on in the background. And this is the thing that I loved about that game, was the atmosphere and all the old music that was on it, because it just lent itself to the story. But that is just a useless bit of trivia. Of course, we've got 3 vocalists here, so those 2 harmony vocals behind Marty's lead vocal. There is another guitar in the mix as well. It's really low down, and it's obviously off camera, but it's just adding something in there lead-wise to make it a little bit more interesting. Talking about interesting things, Marty Robbins' life is such an interesting thing to look into because he did so many different things. He didn't start playing guitar until he joined the Navy when he was 17 years of age. World War II, he was involved with that, and he was in charge of a tank landing craft in terms of navigation and steering, and we've all seen those approaching the beach and then the front opening and the tanks going out. So that would have been Marty driving one of those, and he was based at the Solomon Islands. He really got into Hawaiian music and he loved it, started to play the guitar just to pass the time. So whilst he was learning to play the guitar, he'd write songs as well. And when he was discharged in 1947, he'd then start to play at local venues. This is in Phoenix, and then he got into radio and eventually TV in Phoenix as well. And it was on his TV show that he had a guest, and that guest was little Jimmy Dickens, and Jimmy sorted it out for Marty to sign to Columbia Records, and that's where his recording started. But we're going to be getting back into the performance, and we'll resume interesting things about Marty Robbins after we've watched the performance until the end.
Back in El Paso, my life would be worthless. Everything's gone in life, nothing is left. It's been so long since I've seen the young maiden. My love is stronger than my fear of death. I saddled up and away I did go, riding alone in the dark. Tomorrow a bullet will find me. Tonight nothing's worse than this pain in my heart. And at last here I am on the hill overlooking El Paso. I can see Rose's cantina below. My love is strong and it pushes me onward. Down off the hill to Felina I go. To my right I see 5 mounted cowboys. Off to my left, right, a dozen or more. Shouting and shooting, I can't let them catch me. I have to make it to Rose's back door. Something is dreadfully wrong, for I feel a deep burning pain in my side. Though I am trying to stay in the saddle, I'm getting weary, unable to ride. But my love for Felina is strong, and I rise where I fall. Though I am weary, I can't stop to rest. I see the white puff of smoke from the rifle. I feel the bullet go deep in my chest. From out of nowhere, Felina has found me, kissing my cheek as she kneels by my side. Cradled by two loving arms that I'll die for, one little kiss and Felina, goodbye.
Oh, that's one more song.
And there we have it. So if you're not following along with the story, you're really going to miss out on this performance, because you'll just be nodding your head along in a jolly fashion because of the major bass progression. But when you follow that story, I don't want to mention about the story and take you through it, because if you haven't, get those lyrics up on screen and follow along, because it'll give you such a deeper appreciation. It's really impressive vocally because of the way that the three vocal lines, they're all singing separate notes here, but they're sliding into notes in terms of ascending and descending pitch-wise, but it's perfectly synchronized, and it would take a hell of a lot of rehearsal in order to nail that, especially live in one take. So I mentioned about Marty signing that record deal with Columbia Records. This song was a #1 in the pop charts and the country charts. So Marty had that rarest of things, the crossover appeal from one genre into the next, and his follow-up to this song was called Don't Worry, and that got to #3 in the pop charts. And there's a whole nother story behind Don't Worry and the sound that is achieved with the guitar in that particular song. So Grady Martin was recording the guitar for the track at the time, and Grady, by the way, was one of the top session guys at the time and worked with pretty much everybody, did everything for Patsy Cline and so many other artists, but you can check into Grady if you want to on the internet. But with the recording, they found that there was a channel on the mixer that was faulty. So the recording of the guitar was fuzzy. It had this distorted sound to it. And this was before fuzz pedals and distortion and overdrive. There were blues players that were trying to push the envelope in terms of volume to a point where it would distort as a byproduct of too much volume, but there wasn't something that would just make the sound fuzzy without having to push the volume so much, until this faulty channel came along on the mixer, and rather than re-recording it, Marty kept that sound. That song called Don't Worry was then released in 1961 with this fuzz sound on the guitar, and because it was now in the mainstream, everyone was trying to figure out how to get that sound. And in 1962, that's when the first commercially available fuzzbox was invented and created. So now, from 1962 onwards, so many guitarists picked up that fuzzbox, and it became a sound that would be so prevalent in the 60s and from then on. That song went on to get to #1 in the country charts and #3 in the pop charts. He was also inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1975. He had 17 #1 singles, 82 top 40 singles, and he was also a regular at the Grand Ole Opry, performing there. And I just want to mention Marty's racing as well, because he was really into driving racing cars, and he managed to finance this due to his success as a musician. But when I say that he was into racing cars, I mean he was properly good at racing cars. And to put it in perspective, he raced in 35 NASCAR Grand National races. He finished 6 times in the top 10. So he was competitive as a racer. And also there is a story, a situation that happened whilst he was racing where he saved another racer's life. And when I say that he saved his life, probably more accurately, he avoided killing another racer, because it was Richard Childress who was in a crash that had happened in NASCAR. You probably know this if you're in the USA, but it's just a big, almost loop. Imagine a massive running track. That is the shape of the track. I know in Europe we have Formula One where they travel the world and every circuit is different, but the speeds they get up to in NASCAR are just crazy in terms of hitting 170 miles an hour, sometimes more, just going round effectively a bend and then into a straight and into a bend. So if there is a crash and somebody is stationary in the middle of the track, the amount of time you have to react going at 170 miles an hour and above is minimal. We're talking fractions of seconds here. Richard was in an accident, and I think there were other cars that were involved, so they were stationary as well. But the problem was Richard's car was lying flat across the track. So if it was to be hit by another car, Marty's car, it would have T-boned. So it would have gone right into the side of the car on the driver's side. So when Marty came round to potentially hit Richard's car side on, he had a split second to make a decision, and the decision that Marty made was to crash into the concrete wall on the outside of the track rather than hit the side of Richard's car, which would have definitely severely injured Richard or just outright killed him. And that's what Richard said when he looked across and he could see Marty's car coming towards him. He just expected that to happen, that he wouldn't be there any longer. He would leave this earth. And Marty, by hitting that outer concrete wall, it meant that he suffered a broken tailbone, 2 broken ribs. He also had a gash between his eyes, and I say a gash because it took 32 stitches in order to bring that together again. So it was a split-second decision, but such a selfless decision by Marty to throw himself into that wall, because there's no way that he knew that he would survive. Like I said earlier in this video, Marty had such an interesting life. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1982, aged 57, and that was from quadruple coronary bypass surgery because he had developed cardiovascular disease throughout his life, and that was after his 3rd heart attack. So he still died relatively young, age 57, but he achieved so much in his life in so many different areas, being a fantastic racing driver, but then also a fantastic singer, songwriter, and during the war, being able to deliver tanks. Again, just get the lyrics on screen to really appreciate the depth of the writing here and the message of the song. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.